The Blandwood Mansion, located in downtown Greensboro, is a North Carolina designated historical site. It's the former home of one-time Governor John Motley Morehead, the oldest extant example of the Italian villa style of architecture in the United States. Some say this is where the Civil War ended, and for all intents and purposes it probably did, but that's for scholars to debate. It is undisputed that this is where the Civil War ended in North Carolina. Governor Zebulon B. Vance was hiding out before finally surrendering to Union generals on May 2, 1865, in the parlor of this home. This later became a primitive rehab center where alcoholics and drug addicts were treated with injections of alcohol and drugs. But what is the largely untold story about why the Blandwood house exists? It really shouldn't. 100 years after the Civil War ended, the Blandwood house survives today because of the actions of some remarkable Greensboro women that began back in 1966, almost exactly 100 years since the end of the Civil War here. In 1966, bulldozers were poised to raise a bloated antediluvian structure leaking and collapsing on a prime block of downtown Greensboro real estate, perched on a hill in one of the last residential neighborhoods in the shadow of the Jefferson Building. For almost 70 years, this compound served as a lonely outpost for the Keeley Institute, a live-in rehabilitation program promising drunks and drug addicts that new freedom. After weeks of 4 times daily injections of bichloride of gold laced with alcohol, strychnine, apomorphine, and willow bark. The Keeley Institute's methodology had fallen into disrepute long before the local proprietor's death in a plane crash led to the abandonment of the sanitarium delirium. Paint peeling, cracking plaster, sagging porch, shattered windows, a malingering monster mansion entwined in knotted trees, runaway ivy, and tangled weeds, a landscape nearly as terrifying as the Keeley Cure. They should have shot dark shadows there. Downtown Greensboro was much larger in 1966, a great deal more vibrant. 2 high-rise and 3 smaller hotels, 40 restaurants, 3 lavish movie palaces, multi-story department and dime stores, a buzzing hub of finance, commerce, and most especially shopping. Virginia Zenkes had a nagging suspicion Blandwood Mansion's architect had to have been someone of prominence. As a trend-setting decorator of the 60s, she had an eye for style. Perhaps if a pedigree could be proven, there might be more of an interest in saving the estate. Peering from black-framed round glasses, pencil protruding from her thick dark hair, she pored through books and reference materials, attempting to solve the mystery of who designed Blandwood. That moment of Zenkes came in 1966, a moment Virginia described as akin to King Arthur pulling Excalibur from the stone. It was Alexander Jackson Davis, America's leading architect of country houses, known locally for our gentrified state capitol and at UNC Chapel Hill, the playfully austere facades of Old East and Old West dormitories, and the 4-columned Roman splendor that is the Playmakers Theater, all lavished in the Italianate and Greek Revival genres he was famous for. He also laid out Davidson College and built the first Chambers Hall. The architectural designs for Blandwood, Zenkes discovered, are kept at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Alexander Jackson Davis visited Raleigh in 1844 when he met Governor John Motley Morehead. They bonded. Both were former students of the David Caldwell School, known as Log College. Morehead commissioned Davis to remodel his Greensboro home, a 2-story, 4-room federal-style farmhouse built in 1795 for the man it was named after, a horse thief named Bland. As he was wont to do, A.J. Davis designed around the original structure of Morehead's home, fashioning a revolutionarily modern frontage, veneered in stucco over brick with clean-lined casement windows shaded by sleek overhanging eaves. A home like no other in America, reminiscent of a Tuscan villa featuring 2 large parlors with a garden view bay windows on either side of an imposing 3-story tower made inviting by 3 enormous archways that circumambient the front porch. Completed in 1846, it's the oldest building on an original foundation in the city and one of the first towered Italianate villas in the nation and the earliest surviving example of Italianate architecture in the United States. With Blandwood's important historical lineage confirmed, the ladies who lunched became the ladies who launched. bulldozer stopping Grandma Mary Lyon Caine. She actually stood between the bulldozers and the house to save it from being razed. Called to order the first meeting of the Greensboro Preservation Society on October 31st, 1966. No budget, only a zeal to identify cultural touchstones that needed safeguarding. They quickly came to the realization, however, if Blandwood was to be saved, they'd have to do it themselves. First efforts were strictly DIY. Green Thumb Garden Club members came wielding pruning shears, taming scraggly boxwoods. Greensboro J.C.'s and Thomas Tree Service donated 800 man-hours on Saturdays, clearing the one-block area where they unearthed varieties of ginkgo, Japanese varnish, linden, box elder, white pines, oaks, maples, and mulberry trees. On March 13, 1967, the state's First Lady, Mrs. Dan K. Moore, was given a tour of the dilapidated Blandwood before a luncheon was held in the home of Otto Zenkes a block away. In anticipation of a successful Preservation Society campaign, Guilford College allowed the Keeley added east and west wings to be junked. The carriage house had been moved forward to become a dining hall. The idea was to return it to its original position, but the structure was deemed too compromised to survive another upheaval. The distinctive cupola was set aside to crown a reimagined carriage house. Modernist architect Edward Lowenstein, known for the Greensboro Public Library in 1964 and the YMCA in 1971, buildings as well as homes in the Irving Park and Starmount neighborhoods, was enlisted to oversee one of the first modern-age adapted reuses of a historical property. A committee of 122 was established under the leadership of former newspaper writer Kay Stern, 1966 Woman of the Year. A team led by Kathleen Bryant, Mrs. Wayne McGrew, and Mrs. James Whitten were given a scant few months to raise $400,000, which would be about $4 million today. Junior League President Mary Schenck presented the committee $50,000 from her organization, and they were off and running. Or so they thought. Seemingly forgotten on the part of the public was any knowledge of the historical significance attached to the former residence of Governor John Motley Morehead, the only governor of the state to this day to hail from Greensboro proper. Morehead was an early champion of the railroad when it wasn't an obvious gambit, and a fierce proponent of public education, one that included the disabled, women, and slaves, a concept many considered blasphemous. The governor's response to his critics was masterful. Why would you deny the right of any man, woman, or child to read that book you claim will set them free? He was a true visionary and a man of action, a rare combination. In 1840, Morehead chartered Edgeworth Female Seminary, located where the YMCA is today. His 5 daughters were schooled there. During his 2 terms as governor, 1841 to 1845, he made major transportation and infrastructure improvements, implemented a progressive public school system, and established the Governor Morehead School for the deaf, dumb, and blind. The father of modern North Carolina had one eye focused firmly on the future. In 1854, as the first president of the North Carolina Railroad, he undertook an aggressive expansion of what he called the Tree of Life, connecting every corner of the state to the wider world. As a result, a delicate city of flowers, as Greensboro was known then, morphed into the Gate City, defined by a robust rail system that, not coincidentally, utilized Greensboro as its hub. As talk of secession grew louder in 1861, Morehead was a peace convention delegate, hoping to avoid war with the North. After hostilities broke out, he served in the Confederate Congress and entertained officers as they marched headstrong into Richmond, then again when they returned in retreat. At war's end, Greensboro served as a decommissioning depot with Union officials occupying all of the nicest homes. Morehead's daughter, Letitia Morehead Walker, referred to Blandwood's 1865 house guest, Major General Jacob Dolson Cox, as, quote, a most curious and elegant man, that nonetheless forced her to witness what for her was a macabre sight, a triumphant parade of occupying forces. She wrote, sullen, vindictive, no eulogy was paid. This magnificent pageant, a gorgeous display of thousands of new uniforms, glittering sabers and bayonets, and all flushed with victory and marching to the music of splendid bands. A teacher recalled, quote, our wounded men, sadly depleted, alas, in numbers, were at once transferred to Edgeworth Seminary, and our occupation was gone, but we were allowed to visit them there at the old historic mansion with its beautiful ground that witnessed many glad greetings and sorrowful partings. These were the times that tried the souls of men and women. After John Motley Morehead passed away in 1866, his daughter Emma Victoria and husband General Julius A. Gray became Lord and Lady of the Manor, he being the commander-in-chief of North Carolina's repelling forces during the War of 1812. When the British heard Gray's regiment was in their path, they decided to come to terms rather than face this fearsome foe. Gray initiated the successful effort to preserve the site of the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, saved Greensboro College, and founded the Greater Greensboro Chamber of Commerce. Gray died in 1891. His service was held at West Market Methodist Church. 5 years later, Blandwood was deeded to the Keeley Institute. John Motley Morehead III was one of the founders of Union Carbide, so naturally Kay Stern and Mary Lyon Caine traveled to their headquarters in New York to solicit funds. They were rebuffed. At the conclusion of the fundraising period, the committee had netted $259,598, about two-thirds of what was required. They had been hoping to secure a federal grant, knowing the budget for restoration projects was miserly. Pressed on what would happen if that endowment didn't come through, Mary Lyon Caine insisted, "We're going to save Blandwood." The notion of rehabilitating some moldy old house in lieu of a grocery store in 1966 was as impractical as it was audacious. Enjoying a jet-fueled economy, American society was a go-go-go color TV spacewalks, whammo, high camp, naked time, LSD, mothers of invention, Black Panthers, liquid paper, monkeys, falcons, dolphins, the Pepsi generation living out an endless summer of miniskirts, muscle cars, and Super Balls. Out with the old, in with the new. Disposable culture, obsolescence guaranteed. Suitors had presented themselves to rescue Blandwood before. Guilford College bought the property in 1965, and along with Arnold Schiffman, they put forth a proposal to save the estate. But this shady lady was not an obvious candidate for a long-term relationship. Her very uniqueness, a turnoff. No white column décolletage or proper southern brickwork. Besides, wasn't that the joint shooting up attics with weird serums? On April 17, 1968, HUD allocated over $100,000 to put the ladies within sight of their goal. The rest followed quickly. A week later, after Boy Scouts cleaned and pruned, the Greensboro Women's Club hosted their first open house at Blandwood for the public, which made what happened next all the more heartbreaking. But that's a story for another day.